In the previous video, I looked at the story of Nanda and the 500 duff-footed celestial nymphs. The story comes from the Udana, which is a part of the Pali Canon, the early Buddhist scriptures, and the Udana themselves were supposedly quite early texts. They contain utterances of the Buddha, and stories have been put in place which lead up to these utterances of the Buddha. You get a sense that these utterances might be the genuine words of the Buddha. And my concern in this video is, what is there in this story from the point of view of enlightenment practice? We have the story of Nanda, who during his alms round is shaken by the sight of a lovely Shakyan girl, and he wants to stop being a monk. And this is it's quite a charming story, and you get a sense of a historical context here. Within that historical context, there are also supernatural elements. The Buddha, in order to convince Nanda to continue with being a monk, takes him up to the Tafatimsa heaven, the heaven of the 33, which is located at the top of Mount Sumeru, the axis of the world. It's rather like Mount Olympus. And the king of this heaven is Shakra or Shaka. So the Buddha takes Nanda up to this heaven, shows him these 500 nymphs who are in attendance on Shakra, on Shaka, and promises these nymphs to him, promises these nymphs to Nanda if he carries on being a monk. And so Nanda is much impressed by the beauty of these nymphs. The beauty of the Shakyan girl pales into nothing by comparison. And then, after he's returned from this heaven with the Buddha, and he's getting on with his practices, the other monks start making fun of him, saying that this is why he's engaged in the spiritual life, the holy life, because he wants these nymphs that the Buddha has promised him. And this upsets Nanda. It's as if, God darn it, I'm going to show these monks I don't need any 500 duff-footed celestial nymphs. I'll get there under my own steam. So in this case he's motivated by shame, by embarrassment. He was saddened, humiliated, and rendered despicable by the abuse of his companions. So he went off by himself and attained to the supreme consummation of the holy life. He became an arhat. So the question is, what do we make of this story as enlightenment practitioners? Well, the first thing we have to bear in mind is that this is a story about monks, and there are various assumptions that the context of this story holds, and we could call these assumptions traditional notions of spirituality, or even notions concerning the romance of spirituality, that spiritual realization is about abandoning everything and going off by yourself, and with sufficient effort you can realize liberation. So one of the assumptions of this story is that the life of a monk is spiritually more valid than the life of a householder. That's enlightenment practitioners. No. Enlightenment practice, every situation is our opportunity for realization. There's no such thing as situations conducive to spiritual insight. That's the first difference here. We don't buy into the idea that you have to become a monk in order to achieve spiritual realization. I'd like to refer you back to video 38, which was called The Three Bodies of the Buddha. Now this story of Nanda was probably put together long before this doctrine of the three bodies of the Buddha was concocted. But it doesn't matter, because in video 38 I show you how this particular understanding is a practical one with regards to enlightenment practice, and how it relates directly to the Buddhist threefold training of ethics, of morality, of meditation and of wisdom. That's the threefold training. And it relates to the doctrine of the triple body, in that first training, that of ethics, refers to this physical body, which is sometimes called the body of transformation. This is where the work is going on. The work is going on in this arena. And within this arena, we've got the challenges of the body, of our biology, of hormones, of our moods, and of our biochemistry. And this is what Nanda experienced. He was shaken up by the charms of the Shakyan girl. And this might seem quite charming, but it's rather a devastating incident. Nanda had taken vows. He was devoting himself to a spiritual goal. And now he's smitten by the charms of this beautiful girl. This isn't a light matter at all. It's devastating. And in fact, this has been a problem for men right down the ages. How do we cope with the beauty of women? It totally undermines us, distracts us from our goals. It's not the woman's fault, of course. What's going on with the man is there's a huge amount of projection going on. The man projects the goddess onto the woman. Perhaps he sees the goddess in the woman, but he's smitten. So this has been a problem for men down the ages. Sometimes women are blamed, but what's happening is the man is giving the woman his power. So what traditional cultures did was they cover the woman up. This is associated with Islam nowadays, the hijab or the burqa. But it was the same with other cultures. That's not an Islamic thing, that was going on before Islam. And in fact, if you read St. Paul, Christian women are supposed to be covered up as well. But for some reason the Christians have let that one slip. So that's one way of dealing with it, keep the women covered up. And this can be a relief for the women as well. Many women, if given a choice in such cultures, prefer to remain covered up because they don't want this energy from the men. So being covered up is some protection. And we get a similar thing in Western culture. Western women don't wear the veil, but many Western women cannot go outside until they've put on their cosmetic mask. They feel a need to cover themselves up. They'll even change the colour of their hair, and even cover up their fingernails and toenails. So it's quite a thorough preparation. And why they do this? Well, I think if you suggested that it was to enhance their appearances in the eyes of men, they might feel a little bit indignant. They'd say they're doing this for themselves. They're obviously not doing it to enhance their appearance, because with very rare exceptions, it doesn't enhance their appearance. They're putting on these rather ghastly concoctions of animal byproducts and recycled industrial food waste onto their faces. They might even replace their eyebrows with painted eyebrows and their eyelashes with false eyelashes. So there's nothing particularly attractive about this. So in this way they create a mask. And unless you've got a fetish for aspects of this particular mask, then we can just accept that the woman's covered herself up and not give her any more attention, so we can keep our own focus. So the point here, it is a big thing for men, the attractiveness of women, and a rather crude way of dealing with it is just to cover the women up, which is what happens in traditional and modern cultures. But the Buddha had a different way of dealing with it. He thought he'll give Nanda even more of what he wanted. And this is in the spirit of the second body, the body of mutual enjoyment. And this is where we do our ethical practice. It's about rewiring our mindset. We construct an inner reality which is more beautiful than the outer one. So this is what the Buddha was effectively doing, or what Nanda effectively did. An inner vision was created which Nanda could relate to, and in comparison with anything outside, faded into insignificance. And this is called the body of mutual enjoyment, because it's a wonderful thing to do. You create this inner mythological landscape, and you take this as your point of reference. So that in itself is enjoyable, and it lessens the pain of the physical body. So that's why it's mutually enjoyable. It's enjoyable by the body of transformation, and it's enjoyable in itself. So this is where all the mythology comes in, the mythology of bodhisattvas, of heavens, of angels, of jinns, and of all the rest of it, all these great beings. We can create a world of our imagination and start inhabiting that, or at least take our cue from that. But we take our cue from wherever we can, whatever we can, to spur us on to deepen our practice, deepen our realization. In Nanda's case, it became the attitude of his fellow monks. He couldn't engage with them on a social level, so he actually had to become homeless with respect to the monks and go off and get on with them himself, not taking his cue from the monks. So he's got an inner cue and he's got an outer cue. The main thing is he's getting on with it. But getting on with what exactly? We're not told this in this story. We're not told it. Again, this is the spiritual romance. The idea if you just get on with your practice and persevere, you'll get there in the end. But from the point of view of the enlightenment practitioner, the one body that's missing in this story is the Dharmakaya, the body of truth. And you don't get to this by any kind of practice. This is the realization that you begin from. And this is when we need to be inspired by the effort of Nanda, because we want to keep coming back to this, whatever the reason. So the Buddha's final verse, he who has crossed the slough of impurity. In other words, we don't want to keep getting caught up in things. We don't want our attention to keep getting caught up in things. Who has crushed the thorns of desire. We're no longer being motivated to direct the attention outwards for satisfaction. That bhikkhu, whether there be ease or discomfort, is at peace. So whatever the circumstances, we start abiding in equanimity. And this is the equanimity of the realization of the true nature of awareness. There was just one other point I wanted to make about this instant teleportation which goes on in these early texts. I suspect this is no more than a storytelling device. Otherwise, in these old stories, when the Buddha sends the monks off to get somebody, then you might get caught up with the stories of the monks on the way to find this other monk. So they're just cutting through this with the flex of a strong man's arm. They appear in one place. So there's nothing going on in between. I think it's just a storytelling device. And the Buddha's trip to Tavatimsa heaven with Nanda, well, you make of that what you will. But let's use our imagination to our advantage, to our benefit, and enter into it when we need to. Otherwise, we come back to the missing element of this story, the Dharmakaya, the body of truth, the body of realization. This is the realization of the true nature of the awareness that is hearing this.